So the mutineers obviously aren't under discipline. They don't have really a plan. Their only plan is to get to Delhi, it would appear. Do they have who's in? So how does it's fascinating the progression. The British are basically reeling and trying to figure out what to do, and then in Delhi, I mean, okay, so we've mutinied. We've successfully taken Delhi. We can loot the place if we want. We can get ammunition. We have supplies. Now what? What's the plan? What do we want? What's
Yeah. Well, I think both, as you said, both camps were in confusion. Yeah, the British in Meerut who were, not quite sure what to do. But that was double, even more so for the mutineers. Once they'd actually reached Delhi, they essentially wasted time. In taking the magazine. They actually arrived very early in the morning of the 11th of May. I think the magazine was blown up about 3-4 p.m. that same day. So a lot of that early part of the day was just spent, just going into the palace, the Mughal, the Red Fort, looting, pillaging, killing European civilians here and there, anywhere you can find them. There were basically people looting the bank, and other places. And that wasn't just for the first day. That sort of almost continued, for the next few weeks. Albeit in perhaps more organised fashion. But rather than sort of getting the sort of Delhi population behind them and acting in a very disciplined way, they almost seem to have just lost all discipline. So you could argue, were their sort of principles noble in the sense that they were mutinying, and that's. You could argue about that, but certainly once they'd mutinied and then they'd actually reached Delhi, they seem to have lost all sort of cohesion, and they certainly didn't accept, the royal princes, as their, as their commanding officers, or the the Mughal Emperor as their, as their chief, if you like. So
I was going to say there's a distinct lack of named leaders trying to organize things. It's basically seems to be up to the soldiers, various bands of soldiers in various sizes, battalion to company to any number, sort of doing what they want, and it seems, like you say, very chaotic. And of course, now they're now they're right down the hole. They've crossed the Rubicon. The die has been cast. There's no going back now, and there's just no concrete plan of what to do. There's no one general appointed. They don't like. How does it evolve into some sort of actual resistance or strategy, or what's their plan going on from this?
Yeah. Well, the plan was that there was no plan, I think. They had around about a 6-week sort of grace period, if you like, before the British Commander-in-Chief managed to sort of rustle up enough troops to loyal troops to actually march down to Delhi. So I've got some dates here. So the mutineers reached Delhi on the 11th of May, and the British reached Delhi on the 8th of June. So that's almost a month. Sorry, not 6 weeks. That's almost a month sort of grace period, if you like, that they had to organise themselves, and in fact to take the initiative as well. Not just stick around in Delhi.
Yeah.
They could have easily marched to Meerut and attack the European troops there. In fact, there was plans to do that, but
Mhm.
they just kept putting that off, or they just didn't have the organization to sort of march back and have a
Yeah.
have a contest with these troops. So they literally just sort of almost sat around. A lot of the what you had was the subedars
Mhm.
in the regiments becoming effectively the colonels
Yeah.
of each regiment. But there was a certain amount of jealousy there, and you had a chap called Baht Khan who became the commander in chief of the rebels later on. There was a lot of jealousy towards him. He came from name slips me now, but from further east. He was a Rahila.
Mhm.
He became their sort of commander in chief, but there was a lot of jealousy. Each regiment effectively, almost sort of reserved their own sort of ammunition and gunpowder and stuff. They wouldn't share it with each other. So they were sort of nominally a force,
Mhm.
but very very nominally. Um, so that sort of 4-week period when they really should have been organising themselves was almost sort of wasted, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
And so, yeah, because it just sort of screams this was a popular kind of revolt, not led by any one guy who would have been able to sort of exercise control over the movement of it. Like a lot of revolts will have at least one guy who is already planning it, but this was actually done by the regiments, by like small groups of people within the regiments, speaking for the majority of them, trying to organize mutiny along the line, and it just exploded, and nobody is in charge. And so we're in Delhi and Lucknow as well.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's really interesting reading sort of first-hand accounts, of that time, and I mean, things happen so fast that nobody really, had, the kind of guiding mind, if you like, or even the resources. Once these three regiments had reached, Delhi from Meerut, joined in with the other three regiments from Delhi, you've got 6 regiments, and there's various, over the following weeks, you had various units and what have you joining. Even jihadis were,
Mhm.
sort of deciding, now's the time to, sort of rise up. So you had a huge number of, sort of odds and ends, if you like, coming in. Discontented people who wanted to fight against the British popping up.
Mhm.
And the question was, how do you feed these people? How do you pay these people?
Mhm.
And certainly the Mughal emperor did not have the resources to pay them, and
I mean,
or
what
even
was he?
feed them.
I mean, what even was his take on this? I mean, he wasn't terribly pleased with the British, but he's now literally been lumped. I mean, he can't stop the rebels. If he opposes them, they're probably going to kill him. Um, he's like the most luckless guy in the world at this time. So he's not a warlord.
No.
He's he's a poet
Yeah.
and just pensioner going through the motions, arguing with the British about his pension, and now he's inevitably almost going to end up as the enemy of the British and, like we were saying before, a figurehead of rebellion. And now, now he actually has to wait. He can't have expected this. He can't have really wanted it, and now he has to win a war against the British basically in order to
Mm.
survive because they're not going to be happy about this.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, he's like you say, luckless. I mean, he didn't really have. I mean, he didn't hold any really good cards. As we mentioned, he didn't have any money. He hasn't got any of his troops, any troops of his own. He's not used to raising revenue, which he's going to need to do to, feed this and pay this, sort of enormous army, and it eventually grew to, sort of 20, 30,000 troops, regulars, irregulars, jihadis, whoever wants to, fight the British. So, how do you pay these people? So he was sort of almost cast into a situation which, he's never really been in. He's been a pensioner all his life. He's, it's not like he's in the prime of his life. He's, somewhere around about 80, I think he was at this stage. His sons weren't particularly well respected by the troops as well.
Terribly bright people, might we say?
Not really. There was one or two which, they were sort of. I think the troops, sort of, not having a leader of their own, probably realised that one of the princes, or Bahadur Shah himself, would have to lead them. Even if it's just a nominal sort of role. So they accepted one or two princes, and some of them were popular in the sense that let's have this guy rather than my the Subedar, which we don't like, or whatever. So there was that, but they didn't have any military training. These princes were used to, an idle life, within the palace. No military training of any sort. They had nothing to give, essentially. So, it was about as bad as you can get, really. Until a chap called Muhammad Bakht Khan popped up, who was a Subedar. Who they sort of made their commander-in-chief, if you like. Now he was, I wouldn't say he was a genius or anything, but certainly he was somebody that they, to an extent, accepted as their commander-in-chief, and he certainly had that sort of authority, if you like. He had that sort of gravitas, and he certainly, for a time, managed to sort of organize them to a certain extent, but he never really had that authority and experience that, obviously, a British officer would have had. And there was a lot of jealousy, as I said, against him as well. There was a lot of, why is, I'm a Subedar, why is this guy suddenly commander-in-chief? And, there's, the emperor had promised him, look, if you can beat the British, I'll make you commander-in-chief of, the whole of India, So suddenly, there's a lot of, sort of feeling amongst his peers, what's going on here?
Regimental rivalries plus plus everything else. It's the most. If one of the princes had been a dynamic leader, this would have been the moment he could have stepped in and took the lead. Definitely, this is the moment. This is the moment anybody with that sort of spark would use to do something, and it's probably telling that didn't really happen. And so now they have many problems, which, due to the problems the British are having, is not immediately one of which is not immediately the British, although they know that is obviously going to be coming. So Bakht Khan organizes them to some extent, sort of figures out some of the things, and
that's right. Yes. If I give you a few dates, just in case, just to put things in context, the British arrived in Delhi on the 8th of June, 1857, and so you had, I don't know if I've got the right date with me, 8th of June. But I think Bakht Khan arrived, if I recall correctly, I think it was 1st of July, something like that. Okay. So this was a period where the British just don't have the numbers, to be able to, take a walled city. They don't have the guns. to take down the walls and the gates. They just don't have the numerical strength. Even if they did manage to get into the city, the city being, the way it is, all the narrow lanes and small roads and sort of alleyways, you simply can't keep a force organized, in that sort of street fighting, if you like.
Look at Lucknow, basically. They get in, but they get trapped in there. Is all that's going to happen.
Right. That's right. And the British general realised that it's just not possible. He's under huge pressure from John Lawrence, who's the Commissioner of the Punjab, and Governor General, Canning, to actually take the city. By this stage, everybody's focus is on Delhi. There's mutinies happening elsewhere, but everybody knows that this is the sort of epicenter, if you like. Meerut is where it broke out. Delhi, that's the sort of central struggle, if you like. So everybody's eyes are on there, and he's under almost sort of huge pressure to take the city as quickly as possible. And the thing is, if they don't attack, the more they delay the attack, the more confident mutineers get, in Delhi and elsewhere as well, and in fact, they reckon that the whole of Punjab would have been, sort of up in arms if the British hadn't taken Delhi when they had, if they hadn't sort of taken it, if they'd taken it sort of a week or two later, it might have been too late, So the British were sitting in front of Delhi for almost 2 months, more than 2 months. And that was really sort of having an impact on, British prestige. So, there's a huge sort of pressure on, General Wilson to actually take, there was a number of different commanding officers. I don't think we've got time to go through all of that, but certainly he was the chap who was responsible for, taking the city at the end. And what was happening was that although the British didn't have enough troops to take the city, at the same time, the disorganisation of the mutineers made it almost a stalemate, if you like. So you've got the numbers on, the mutineers' side. They've got endless supplies of ammunition and what have you. They've got the numerical strength, but they haven't got the discipline. And on the British side, you've got the discipline, and you do have the right officers, but you just don't have the numerical strength to actually take the initiative. And that sort of carried on right through, July and August time. So, they call it the Siege of Delhi, but, whether it was a siege or, who was the it was a party that was being besieged is another thing, because the British were under sort of huge pressure at that time. From the mutineers, they used to sort of launch an attack, every day, and then just, go back into the city. In fact, one of the issues was that they never actually came out, with their full strength. They used to sort of send a couple of regiments out to attack the British, and then, the next day another couple of regiments would go out. But there was never a sort of concerted attack. Very rarely was there one. So, the British found it easy to, maintain their sort of position, if you like, on the ridge. Although, casualties were mounting. So, this was a period where, it could have gone either way, and in fact, Wilson actually talked to his officers about actually, leaving the ridge at one stage, because there weren't enough reinforcements coming in. But he was getting casualties every day, so the actual sort of his strength was actually decreasing rather than increasing.
Because like we were saying before we started the recording, this is not a siege by any stretch of the word. I mean, generally, what you want to do in a siege is you bring up the army against the place you want to get in, and you block it off with smaller elements all around the other side, all around the different sides, and maybe you blow holes in different sides of it if you can, if you have the artillery to do it. But with Delhi, Wilson, obviously, he wasn't there at the beginning. His predecessor before that drew up the army before he died of disease, I think, was it, or something like that. He drew up the army on Delhi Ridge, which is it's a formidable position for an army to. It's a good position to defend, but it doesn't stop. Critically, it doesn't cut off Delhi from supplies. It doesn't cut off Delhi from reinforcements. And as you're saying, the British receive, I think, small amounts of reinforcements periodically. Like we were saying before, the Gurkhas were one of the reinforcements that came in, and but there's just you can't attack it. You have to just stay put, and who knows how long they're going to stay there. So it's perfectly logical for Wilson to sort of be thinking, well, maybe we should just come back when we actually have the troops to do this, because they're just sitting in observation, getting pounded every day by artillery from the walls and attacked. I've forgotten the name of it. Is it Subzimanzi or something like that?
Subzimanzi,
yeah. Come through the
vegetable market,
come through the market and attack one of various points along the ridge. I mean, it goes down in history. The main picket at Hinderau House was defended by the 60th Rifles Seymour, and the Seymour Battalion with some artillery units as well. And they, throughout this entire period, throughout the summer, they just sit at this position and get attacked every day, and ridiculous losses on these battalions by the end of the operation. And it's just interesting to think that if the mutineers had again been a bit more organized and attacked seriously the ridge, maybe they could have actually forced the British to retreat. No, I actually go so far as to say they could have absolutely forced the British to retreat if they had actually used the resources at their disposal.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, it was a curious kind of siege, really. The British had reinforcements, sort of, in dribs and drabs coming in all the time. Not just units, but supplies of all kinds. And the sepoys never really had the organization and the sort of vigor, if you like, to try and sort of definitively sort of cut off the British force from supplies from the Punjab. So it was quite a strange sort of situation. And similarly with the British, they never really had the strength to lay siege to the whole city. So, apart from the Kashmir Gate and the north of the city, I think up to the Kabul Gate, they kept an eye on that section, just the north of the city. But, the rest of the city, east, west, south, it was totally open. Whoever wants to go into the city, come out, bring in whatever's into the city, can do that. So, it was a kind of quite a strange sort of situation, but it's important to remember that the British had a good position of their own. So you had the Delhi Ridge, to the on the side of the river, but on the other side you had quite a large canal sort of running, which sort of goes into the Jamna River. So the British had a very good position where they're sort of protected on their east and protected on their west as well. And the only position along which the sepoys could attack them, the mutineers could attack them, was from the south through the Sabzi Mandi, through what's called the vegetable market, or they could attack by the ridge. But obviously, climbing up the ridge is no easy stuff. So that was, it was actually a very good position to sort of wait at till you've received reinforcements. And I don't think the sepoys or the mutineers ever realised, the sort of the present, if you like, that they gave the British in giving away this position so cheaply, right at the start,
Yeah. It's
so yeah.
And even, I mean, giving it up is one thing, I guess, because the British could have taken it if the sepoys went out to do battle. They probably could have taken it if they wanted to. But the point is whether they could have held it is the thing, if they had actually contested it. And also why it's one of the many questions that comes up in military history, isn't it? It's like, okay, so why didn't you just then cut them off from their supplies? Because you have the power to do that. But they don't particularly do that. They keep doing these sort of curious, very brave, but relatively strategically pointless assaults on small portions of the ridge, and they're never very well coordinated. So they're bleeding the British, giving them a hard time. Obviously, it's not a picnic out there on the ridge or anything like that. It's summer, coming on to summer in India. But the British plan must essentially be to hold on until enough reinforcements get there that they can actually take the place. And where do these reinforcements come from, and how does the British plan progress? Because now the initiative is no longer with the mutineers and the rebels. It's with, because they just completely give away the initiative. It's with the British, balls in their court. So how do they play it?
That's right. Yeah. And in fact, at one stage, the British didn't really want the mutineers to, turn up at Delhi, but they very quickly they realised that, this is actually working to our benefit. Simply because, if they'd sort of taken the initiative elsewhere, they could have easily, sort of, mopped up, various British units or British civilians or whatever. If they just sort of scoured the country doing that, that would have been much more dangerous than these guys simply just turning up at Delhi and then effectively just sitting there, and trying the odd sort of, chance at the ridge once in a while. So it was actually working for the British. One of the things that actually helped the British at this stage was the fact that the Sikhs were with the British. So in terms of supply lines, most of their stuff was actually coming from the Punjab. Certainly all the heavy guns to try and retake the city, and the Maharajas of Patiala, of Jind and Nabha, which were the sort of princely states between Delhi and the Punjab proper, were actually pro-British. So they were actually sort of helping all these supplies and guarding the supplies coming down. So in one sense, it would have been difficult for the sepoys to try and intercept these supplies, but certainly they made a they made a complete mess of it anyway. So
it's very true though. If you see a map of where Delhi is and where Punjab is, you'll see that that's the obvious place where you'd want supplies coming from, because otherwise they'd have to get them from what, Madras or Bombay, something like that. So it's vital that Punjab basically remains pro-British or under British control.
That's right, yes. In fact, I think there was some troops from Bombay, if I recall correctly, but they couldn't actually march, due north to Delhi. simply because it's too dangerous. So they had to actually, sail to Karachi and then go all the way, up Punjab,
Mhm.
up to Firozpur,
Mhm.
and then down again to Delhi. That's a sort of tortuous method they use to
Mhm.
actually get to Delhi. Uh, but yeah, you're right. I mean, that was Punjab was the only real place that they could actually get these supplies from.
Because otherwise you had
Especially
to
the
cross.
guns, I
Yeah.
mean, all the big guns are being held in the Punjab.
Yeah.
The idea was that we need them to sort of keep hold of the Punjab or
Yeah.
use them on the frontier. There were no heavy guns that immediately available anywhere else.
Mhm.
Close to
Otherwise,
Delhi.
otherwise reinforcements and big guns and stuff would have to have marched uh, like through the Ghats, up through the Deccan, and that's just too far and easy to be attacked from, basically.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was a no. I mean, I don't think they even contemplated that really.
No.
I think they knew that we've Punjab is stable.
Mhm.
Let's use it and come round that route. And and of course there was heavy recruitment of more troops from the Punjab, which couldn't have been done elsewhere.
Mhm.
So that was literally the sort of lifeline, if you like. There was various European troops, still in Punjab. You had the Nicholson's column going around Punjab, sort of mopping up various sort of mutineer units. Um, so that was really the only source, if you like, um, of everything really for the siege of Delhi, because all the area from Delhi right up to Calcutta was, it was in sort of almost total flux, wasn't it?
Mhm. That's absolutely the
So,
case. So, how long did this state of sort of limbo last for then?
well, the British arrived in Delhi 8th June, and I think Nicholson arrived. I've got some dates with me. He arrived in on 14th August. So from 8th June to 14th August, that's over 2 months. You
Mhm.
had this sort of stalemate, if you like,
Mhm.
um, where first of all the mutineers have the upper hand, but it's sort
Mhm.
of gradually sort of slipping away from them. They don't have the discipline to sort of keep morale high. So they're getting quite a lot of mutineers just slipping away essentially. Morale is very bad in the city. All sorts of people are just a lot of soldiers obviously had sort of sort of looted and pillaged in the city itself. They've made some money. Um, they're not fully committed to sort of the mutiny anymore. They're failing to sort of dislodge the British from the ridge. It's been going on for 2 months, and at this stage, there's an awful lot of you know mutineers just disappearing. But then again, there's more coming into the city.
Mhm.
So the overall numbers, it's difficult to say, but the overall numbers are probably sort of stable, if you like.
Mhm.
So you had that situation, but
Mhm.
very slowly, the sort of balance of power is shifting towards the British. And certainly, morale is really high, because they know
Mhm.
that the sepoys are just not having any sort of impact, on
Mhm.
this ridge position. And then, of course, on the 14th of August, General John Nicholson arrives, and he's got quite a substantial number of reinforcements, and there's some more reinforcements that come up after him as well. So finally, the British have
They they can
a
start
certain
planning.
force, a force that's capable of taking the city, even though they're numerically inferior to, the mutineer
Well, you
army.
see, I think it's probably the case that once I think that they get up to like 8 or 9,000 men or something like that eventually. Once the British, those are numbers the British are happy to be outnumbered with, basically. They're quite happy to take on larger forces in India so long as they have at least 8,000 men or so, 8,000 men.
Yeah, I think Wilson was always still a bit,
Yeah.
a bit cautious about it.
I mean,
And
yeah, it's
there's
true. I mean, you are attacking a city, so it's not as simple as a field army like that. But yeah, so there's the point there. Yeah.
That's right, yeah, and he almost had to be pushed into it. I think Nicholson was really, and various other officers were very sort of aggressively sort of canvassing for a quick attack, and as we said earlier, he was under huge pressure from John Lawrence in the Punjab, the Governor General, to take the city as quickly as possible. They'd been sitting outside it for over 2 months, so there was that pressure. But yeah, with Nicholson's arrival, they've got the force
And presumably the
sufficient to, to,
guns.
to take a chance, essentially.
Presumably the guns as well. Now.
Yeah, the guns as well. There was a period of, well, I can give you some dates. In fact, I've got a slight chronology here. So you had the British assault on the city beginning, or rather the British siege train arriving on the 4th September.
Okay.
And the British attack on the city started on the 14th September. So for that 10-day period, the British guns were, firing at the walls in the north of the city almost continuously, 24 hours a day, literally. They had to stop sometimes because the guns were getting too hot. Essentially, that was the only thing that was stopping them from a continuous bombardment. And in fact, the sometimes they didn't have the shot ready to be fired as well. But apart from that, it was literally for 10 days. The northern walls and the Kashmir Gate area, right up to the Kabul gates, and all that area got a huge amount of attention. Ready for the assault on the city.
I don't know whether there's a lot of famous photos of the mutiny and stuff like that. I don't know if any of the photos show the damage done to the walls of Delhi or not. But you can see a lot of. If any of the viewers would like to see examples of what artillery fire does to these sorts of structures, it's on the internet to see.
Yeah. I mean, it's there are pictures, of the damage. Sometimes I think there wasn't really that much damage. In all honesty, maybe it's difficult to.
I mean, let's put it this way: it's like when people think of a siege and stuff like that, they think of like shells coming over the walls and blowing up buildings and setting fire to stuff. But this 10-day bombardment, I think I'm reading it correctly, is entirely focused on breaking the outer walls, so to create breaches so the infantry can get in, basically. And therefore, the damage is mostly going to be restricted from the artillery's point of view to the curtain walls, basically.
That's right. Yeah. The mutineers did manage to repair the walls, as the damage occurred. So sometimes when you see the walls, the pictures that were taken, after the end of the siege, you think, oh, hang on, doesn't seem to be an awful lot of damage there. But then they were repaired, as the thing went along. So it was, it was. I think the mutineers knew, there's going to be an attack coming along, and in fact, there are some letters, and documents that were found in the palace suggesting that there were indications that the what was it, the 14th of September? That's the date it's going to be on, and this information I think must have arrived the same day that the attack began. because certainly, a lot of the British officers didn't know, it was going to happen
But
on the
yeah,
14th as well. So
all depends on the gunners declaring the breaches practicable, basically.
yeah.
So it's not something people know until like the night before, usually.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the Wilson sent a team of guys to actually inspect the breaches and to have a look at the Kashmir Gate and see what the situation was. And they said, "Yep, we can do it." And that was literally the signal for the attack on that on the following morning, if you like. So yeah, it was all up to the engineers, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's as you were saying from both sides. I mean, there's the idea of rebuilding the walls as they get broken is a fairly common thing you find in sieges, and there's very famous examples of it at the first siege of Bharatpur, where the Jat garrison was actually so successful in rebuilding the walls between bombardments that Lake just couldn't get in the place. So obviously they weren't so successful here because an assault happened,
Yeah. What's surprising is that the sepoys, or rather the mutineers, didn't really organise much, as far as I can see, inside the city. They could have done more, because once the British did break in, they managed to sort of almost, march right to two or three of the other gates of the city, fairly quickly, which they shouldn't really have done, or managed to do. And it's just another sort of indication of the sort of lack of, organisation, on the mutineer side.
there's just such a lack of leadership. It's the thing.
Yeah. Well, there's an interesting sort of an account by I can't remember who it was, which officer, but he said there was quite a bit of resistance on the first day, but because the British had managed to sort of take control of three or four of the city gates, it was almost like a balloon had sort of somebody pricked a balloon. In terms of resistance, the next day after that, it was much lower. And the British, even though they just didn't have the numbers, they managed to sort of comb their way southwards, all across the city, reasonably. I wouldn't say it was easy, but it should have been a lot more difficult. And certainly, none of the princes or the king actually, they didn't really take part in any of this defense of the city, if you like. Sort of conspicuous by their absence, I think.
There's no last stand of Tipu Saab here.
No, they sort of disappeared, sort of to the south of the city, through the city gates. But there wasn't a sort of heroic, sort of last stand or anything.
It's because it sounds like there should have been much more resistance, because there's other sieges in India where the British had an awful time actually, because there's usually two stages depending on what type of a city it is. You have to take the fortress, you take the town, and then you take the fortress, and it's usually two sieges in one, and they're both very difficult usually.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, Wilson was actually really worried that taking the city would be impossible, simply because you've got all these sort of narrow lanes and houses. I mean, effectively each house becomes almost a mini fortress. If you've got a few guys on the roof of the house, they're firing down, you've literally got to smash your way in through every house to try and get to these guys. And it's very easy to create sort of ambushes and what have you, simply because in these sort of narrow lanes and narrow roads, it's very difficult to keep any sort of organisation. And of course the Red Fort, that was pretty much a sort of an easy capture for the British troops, because the the mutineers had simply, vanished. So they blew up the gate for the Red Fort, and there were a few guys inside, but they were sort of disposed of fairly quickly. But certainly, if the mutineers had actually stayed inside the Red Fort, it would have been very difficult to sort of worm your way in.
So that's obviously the siege of Delhi, the assault of Delhi. They take it, and this what's the effect of this? This is obviously a very, I mean, in a way, the mutineers have been delivering blows against themselves in the way they've been conducting this war. But now the British have actually landed a pretty crippling blow against the rebellion. Would this be fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think it had a huge impact. Certainly, the fall of the city. We were mentioning the Punjab earlier. There are sort of accounts, as I mentioned, about a lot of people in Punjab thinking, oh, hang on, maybe we should be rising up. If the British can't take Delhi, now's the chance to sort of make Punjab independent again. So it had an absolutely huge impact, especially in the Punjab, and stopped any sort of rebellion there, if you like. And I'm sure it had an impact, all around the country, really. It was, it's a big sort of morale booster for all the European troops that were having problems all around the northeast of India as well. But it's important to remember that the bulk of the mutineers actually managed to escape. British just didn't have the strength to just take the city and to chase all these mutineers that had left the city from in the south of the city through the gates there. So in terms of casualties, it's difficult to say. You always read accounts of huge numbers of sepoy bodies being found everywhere, but whether that's true or not, or what simply because they had a very easy escape route from the city,
because they could, as we said before, they couldn't cut it off from help or anything like that. So if you wanted to leave Delhi, you had fairly good opportunities to do so.
That's right. Yeah.
And I presume a lot of them either just went home, went into hiding, or joined other centers of resistance, I guess. I know, and for the British perspective, of course, another thing was that the fall of Delhi meant that troops could then be moved to other sectors to suppress the rebels there.
That's right. Yeah. Although the troops were allowed to sort of loot the city.
Of course. That's just the rules.
That's right. Yeah. So as soon as the city was captured, the city was effectively turned over to the troops. So like I said, there wasn't any attempt to chase the mutineers southwards or anything like that. And the troops had the city pretty much to themselves for almost like 3 months. So if I show you I can dig up some dates if you like. So I mean, the city was officially captured on the 20th September, and the official sacking of the city ends on the 15th of December. So October, November, December. So almost 3 months. Just almost a week or two short of 3 months. The city was just given to the troops.
Now that is unusual, to be honest. It's completely normal to hear that after you've had to assault a city wall, i.e., these are the old rules of war. If you batter a hole in the wall, you're supposed to ask the defenders to surrender, and if they say no, you're allowed to do anything you want with it. Codicil, if they're rebels, you don't really ask them to surrender. you don't have to because they're rebels and you're probably going to execute most of them anyway. So in this instance, I don't believe they called on this fortress to surrender, did they?
No, no.
No, I don't think so. No, they just attacked.
It was attacked.
So they just attack it because they're fighting rebels, and it's and so thereafter the rules are that then you're allowed to loot the city. It's just because you had to attack the breach and lose men doing it, you're allowed to loot the city. It's the reward to the troops, basically, to to be able to plunder the place. But usually they would then stop the looting after, like, at most, I think, I'm going to say 3 days, maybe a week, at the most extreme. This is very extreme that they just let the troops have it for this amount of time.
Yeah. I think it was due to, the paucity of troops, I think, and the fact that it's quite a large walled city. So, you had, the troops literally, going around, every house, digging up the floor, digging up the ceilings, digging up the walls, because, people tended to hide their valuables, so it was a question of literally going through, each and every, well, almost every, sort of house and residence, and literally just trying to find, what there is. There were calls to end it, end the looting about 4 weeks after, the British had captured the city. But for some reason or other, it just carried on. So it was actually one of the most, you could call it probably the most extensive, sacking of a city.
Never heard of such a thorough sacking. I mean, maybe some medieval things, I think, maybe possibly you hear about stuff. But in terms of the British, I mean, I'm thinking like when they sacked Seringapatam, they had that stopped like the night after or something like that. So I mean, it's fascinating that they decided you can go to town on this place, guys.
Yeah, I mean, it was mentioned, as I said, by I think John Lawrence wrote a couple of times, from Punjab, saying, look, we've got to, we mustn't forget that the mutiny is still continuing elsewhere, and if we act like, barbarians or whatever, it will be noted elsewhere, so at this situation, what the British had done was, as soon as they'd captured the city, all the inhabitants, all the locals were essentially expelled. So, the whole city was empty, and that was to allow, for the troops to sort of systematically, if you like, go through the place, finding what they could. So yeah, that's how long it took, and I can't remember exactly when, but I think it was in December. I think it's about 2-3 months after the capture of the city that the Hindu population was allowed back in. And they were only allowed back in because, that was the official stop to the, the plundering. If you can't have, loads of people just, sort of milling around while people are sort of digging up the city. I think the Muslim portion of the city were allowed about a couple of months after that. I think it was February 1858, something like that. So yeah.
Fascinating. I mean, at the same time, it's complete anarchy, and at the same time, it's really ordered because usually civilian populations suffer a great deal when cities are stormed and looted. So it's fascinating on a whole other level that they decided to get everybody out so they could loot it more thoroughly.
Yeah, there was huge lines at the city gates when they captured the city. The inhabitants were told to essentially form queues, at the city gates, and they were all searched. Obviously you have to search them to, make sure they're not taking anything with them. So, there's all sorts of accounts of, the queue's moving really slowly,
Yeah.
as they searched each and every person that before they were expelled.
Yeah. Okay.
And you had this huge sort of refugee camp. In fact, just sort of adjacent to the British cantonments. So these people were literally sitting there for 3 months, hoping to be allowed back into the city. So yeah, it was very extensive.
Well, this is
Right down to pots and pans.
Yeah,
They literally had warehouses to sort of contain all the pots and pans. All the books. Even books were taken, and furniture, and these were sort of resold back to the inhabitants when they came back in to increase the the plunder money.
Okay, right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's one of the most bonkers things you'll hear tonight, I think. But that is, I think that sort of brings us to the end of what we can cover in terms of talking about the Siege of Delhi. I mean, we could have gone into more detail about the tactics and the specific actions and the days and the people and things like that. But this is YouTube, and we've already gone on for like an hour and 40 minutes. So, how did this affect the basically the mutiny? How did this help end the mutiny? And should in the wrap up, we'll just sort of say, how did this affect the wider picture?
Well, as you know, the mutiny, carried on till the next year. So in that sense, it was just almost a sort of a standalone episode, if you like, Josh. So, so it did carry on till the next year. Like we mentioned, most of the mutineers simply escaped, including, Bakht Khan, who was the, mutineers' commander-in-chief. He managed to make a good escape. The main thing that happened after the siege was that the British captured, the King of Delhi, the Mughal Emperor, and several of his sons, and some of them were sort of executed in sort of fairly sort of controversial sort of circumstances. But he was exiled, King of Delhi was exiled. So that sort of, brought an end to the Mughal dynasty, really.
So it's less affecting the eventual end of the mutiny as it is much more important as the end of the Mughal dynasty. And many books have been written on the fate of Bahadur Shah, but it's very tragic. It has to be said, the way that it was ended. And as we said before, the emperor is just the most luckless guy in the world. I mean, that this is the inevitable ending of the failure of the rebellion that chose him, that he didn't start, but yet ended up being a figurehead for, is in a way the epitaph of the Siege of Delhi.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to sort of sum it up, Josh. His character, the fact that he was totally luckless, really, and just not suited for that occasion. Way past his prime, totally wrong time, for him personally to head a rebellion. That pretty much just sums it up, really. Everything that went wrong.
By complete accident, they just chose his house to to go, and it seemed on his part. Yeah. Suddenly he wakes up and he's suddenly surrounded by a mutinous army, and the inevitability is they're going to basically say that we're doing this for you.
That's right. Yeah. Well, that's what they did say.
Yeah.
But they were doing it for themselves. That's what all rebellions are, I think. A sort of curious mixture of, we're doing it for you, but we're doing it for ourselves as well.
Yeah. And that's a good place to wind up this very interesting chat about the Siege of Delhi, the subject of which you have written a very excellent book. You can follow you on Twitter and Facebook, should you so wish, and the information will be contained as well in the description box. As you said before, you don't spend a lot of time on social media, but when you do appear, I always find your stuff very interesting.
Right. Well, it's been great chatting to you, Josh. So, like I said, we've been in touch with each other for ages, haven't we? But we've never done this before. So maybe, hopefully, do a few more sessions, in the future.
I would very much like to do that. Thank you for agreeing to come on the show and talking to me about it. We should definitely do more videos together.
Cool.
Right, and now we'll do the wrap up. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for watching this video and our chat. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, then please go and do all the things you're supposed to do at the end of the video to let us know that you did enjoy it. That's the like, that's the subscribe, the endless list of things that YouTubers tell you to do when you leave a video. Please do it. I do really appreciate it. I know I'm being flippant about it, but I actually do really appreciate when people subscribe and like. Leave a comment below. Ask me or Amarpal any questions you might have. We'll do our best to answer them. Just let us know if you liked it. Would you like to see more? Anything that pops into your head, just chat endlessly below. And on that note, to have courage and have compassion. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you for watching.